without parole for non-homicide offenses. Okay? However, states can offer parole hearings with no guarantee. So if you're non-homicidal, I can give you life with parole, and every time your parole comes up, I deny it, which is a life sentence without parole. Okay. Miller versus Alabama. Juvenile offenders cannot be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for homicide convictions. So now if they kill someone, you have to give them the possibility of parole. But once again, I don't have to pardon you, but I have to include it in the process. DNA testing has complicated the issue. 2000, Governor of Illinois announced a moratorium. Moratorium just means stop on executions since 13 inmates on death row proven to be innocent as a result of DNA testing. Maryland has temporarily had a moratorium, but then it was lifted in 2003. In 2004, Congress passed the Innocence Protection Act, helped to pay the cost post-convictions of DNA, because there have to be automatic appeals. All prisons technically are supposed to provide at least law libraries that are adequate, and now this law allows for people who want to do case law for people, like the Innocence Project. It's no longer, it has to be pro bono or for free. They can get paid for their service, and because we found 163 so far, it's kind of hard to argue the fact that we make mistakes. We do. So support for the death penalty remains strong in the U.S. I'm sorry, I said 31 states, 32 do. More than half the population supports it. Back in 1976, it was 87%. It's down to 57 nationwide. Florida, 57. Doesn't mean the court's going to remand it and do away with it, but it's being examined. Again, 143 prisoners have been executed, 163 exonerated. Average number of years between being sentenced to death and exonerated, 11.3. Why? Because it takes time. And we'll get into this on Wednesday, why it takes so much time. We'll also get into the cost factor and some other issues as well. Internationally, half the nations of the world have banned the death penalty. We're the last Western industrialized country, from Canada, the US, Mexico, over to Western Europe. We're the last one that still endorses the death penalty. So we had two guys escape from Ossining Prison in upstate New York, both in there for murder, and everybody said, oh, where are they going? Where are they going? Where are they going? They searched all over the place. One of them they killed. They found the other one by the Canadian border. I mean, I'm sorry, did you not realize that Canada doesn't endorse the death penalty? So if you escape, they will find you, they will incarcerate you, but they won't give you back to the States because the death penalty is on the table. They'll put you in prison for life, but they don't endorse the death penalty. They won't extradite you, thank you, that was the word. In other words, they won't bring you back, but they won't let you go.
So it's almost like they're asking for asylum in their own way.
Well, as long as you don't mind being locked up in prison for life, and we'll get to that too, because most people on death row, most people on death row and most people doing life without parole are in isolation. They're in solitary, and I'll explain what that looks like when we get into Wednesday's lecture. It's not your... No TV, all this. It's not. You're in a cell. Yeah, I was trying to think of what it was like, like some country club. I was thinking of campus. Country club, yeah. So, almost all the executions today are carried out by, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. And so the question becomes, is capital punishment ever a justifiable offense? So just out of curiosity, how many of you, there's no right or wrong, how many of you are for the death penalty? I can defend it. And how many of you are absolutely against it? And how many of you are not sure? Okay, well, we'll make a case for and against it as we get into the conversation on Wednesday. Might some of it come up today. Let's first talk particulars. There you go. So, and you'll see this. These are all facts, people. Case law. You need to know case law. You need to know the facts about the nature of punishment, the people who commit murders, etc. So punishment has 5 parts to it. Number 1, the nature of punishment must involve pain, harm, or another unpleasant consequence. So you're speeding, you get a ticket, money out of your pocket. Anybody have money out of their pocket they just want to throw at the judicial system? And then if you don't want to lose this or that, you pay more money and you go sit in a class to something you already knew about and decided you weren't going to follow anyway, and so they get more money out of you. That's an unpleasant thing. However, it can also be painful. You can still get executed in the United States. Or if you commit the wrong kind of crime, you can get dealt with by the people who run the house. Not the jailers, they keep the house. The people who run the house. Number 2, it must be administered for an offense against a law or rule. So you may be coyote ugly, and I'd like to charge you with that crime, but there's no law against coyote ugly yet, so you cannot be charged with that crime. It must be a legal crime, whether it's legitimate or not. We can talk about that when we get to social justice. There are laws that shouldn't be on the books that we have on the books. But you have to be charged for crime against a law that's on the books. Must be administered to someone who has been judged guilty, so they can charge you with a crime. They have something called habeas corpus. It's a Latin word for presenting the body. Within 72 hours, if you're charged with a crime, you have to be presented before a magistrate with legal counsel or one's appointed to you, and there has to be sufficient evidence to find you guilty. If the judge says there isn't, they let you go, sometimes on bond, sometimes on recognizance. You could bring yourself back. If they find more evidence, they can bring you back again, and if there's enough evidence, they can put you in jail, and then you're done being presented before a judge. So you have that right to at least defend yourself the first time through in the court before a magistrate saying, I'm not guilty, and the judge says, I don't see sufficient cause to keep you here, and so they let you back out on the street. You can be guilty as could be, but if you don't have enough evidence, that's your civil protection. This goes back to the divine right of kings, where the king could just take you right out of life without a reason justification. Okay, I have a friend in Mexico. We were down there, and his niece was, I don't know how to explain. Do I have anyone from Mexico? No one. Okay, it'll be in Mexico. Mm-hmm. You've been in Mexico? You drive in Mexico? Up in the north, in the high desert, the streets are narrow. Property is real important. So we happen to be, and it's a two-way street, and so they're parked on both sides, and there's enough room for one car to go through. So she was going through, and they have what they call topes. You know what topes are? Tope, you know what a tope is? Yeah, it's a bump. It's like our speed bumps, but these are bumps. You go this way across them, where you leave your muffler behind you. And so you go very slow, and she was driving like 5 miles an hour, and no room between the cars. This is a real story. And this little girl jumped out, hit her, and killed her. Unintentional homicide, took her to jail. And so Joe and I got together, and they had a couple of old vans we sold, and we just brought some music equipment down to them for some stuff they were involved in. We sold that, and we came up with $5,000. We went in and talked to the judge. Notice there's no lawyer involved. And we gave the judge $5,000, and the judge took what the judge thought was reasonable for him, and then he offered the family what was left over, and the family wanted more. He said, take it or leave it. So they took it, and the girl got out of jail, never saw the judge, never saw a lawyer, never saw a courtroom. This is justice in the world. I'm not saying it's not here, but here it's under the table. And in the real world, when I was in Europe and you traveled around, you always carried 45 Deutschmark. If you got busted for speeding, you pay your ticket right there. Otherwise, you and the car go to jail until someone comes and pays your ticket. So it's all over. That was more legitimate, and up front, you knew when you went out on the road, you needed Deutschmark, or you were gonna, if you got caught speeding, you're going to jail for a while. But this pays your way out of a lot in the world, and it's above board. I was going to southern Mexico. We drove a vehicle across the border. We got stopped. It's really funny. Our immigration, when you come in the country, there's immigration. In Mexico, that's immigration is 7 miles in. They don't use the IM. They call it migración. But to get in, you have to go and pay your way to get out. So you have to tell them you're in, show them ID, and say, so where are you thinking of leaving? And they give you a card that lets you go from that point, that exit point, out. So we were driving in. Well, when you drive in, you go across the border, they have checkpoints, and they have these traffic lights that don't work. And so you pull up to it, and it senses you're there, and it'll go green, 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 red. Green, 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 red. Or it may go green, red, whatever they state. So we went through it, and it happened to turn red. And I knew the guy at the border. He has us pull over, open the trunk. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and my friend Pepe says, why don't you give him a few bucks, and we can. I said, why do I want to give him a few bucks? Let him go. I said, do you have anything in the luggage that I don't know about? Well, no. I said, let him go through the luggage. So about 5 minutes later, he said, ándale pues, ándale, ándale. This was for later on when we ran into DEA and the military checkpoints internal. Wouldn't it be something if we had DEA and military checkpoints in this country like all other countries do? Sorry about that. Go ahead.
In regards to what happened in current events with the American journalist, who was an American citizen that with the Saudis, they gave $100 million. Here you go.
Here you go. Money talks, and
that was it. You guys heard anything else in regards to about it on the news?
So punishment must be painful, unpleasant, or harmful. Number 2, you have to be charged with a true offense against a crime. Number 3, you have to be found guilty of that offense. Number 4, the punishment must be imposed by someone other than the offender, so you can't walk into court with a chain and beat yourself over the back for 5 minutes and say, okay, I've suffered enough. Someone who has the legitimate, lawful right to sentence you has to do that. Judge, jury, whatever. And finally, punishment must be imposed by rightful authority. So if it's a local case, it's probably a local sheriff, or it's a county sheriff, or it'll be a state prison. Governor can exonerate you. If it's a federal crime, the President of the United States can exonerate you. Otherwise, you're stuck with whatever you get, unless you prove yourself innocent from what you were charged with. So these 5 nature or parts of nature punishment you will see on your quiz, please understand them. They're not that difficult. Now, aims of punishment. This is even trickier, okay? Warning, this is tricky, so you have to get this. The first aim of punishment is retribution. We call that simple justice, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This goes back to something of ancient times called Hammurabi's Law. King Hammurabi, by the way, what is Hammurabi's Law? Really? No, not the Golden Rule. No. Okay, say what? Nope, not Solomon. Hammurabi.
It dates back to the time when Solomon was...
Even before Solomon.
Oh, really?
8,000 years ago, yeah. Hammurabi.
10 Commandments?
No. Hammurabi. Well, this has been good. I'm glad I brought that up. Hammurabi says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's the most quoted justification for the death penalty. You kill someone, we'll kill you. Well, that is an application of Hammurabi's Law, but Hammurabi's Law was specifically created by the king to make sure that the punishment fit the crime. So if you spit on the street, I couldn't chop off your head. That would be abusive. But if you took someone's life, I might take your life as well. So Hammurabi's Law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, really means that the punishment must fit the crime. Now, if you kill someone, maybe we should kill you. So that's invoked the most time, Hammurabi's Law. We call it simple justice or an eye for an eye. Now, you have to understand this about retribution. It's getting even. It's revenge. You do us and we'll do you. That's the silver rule. I'll do to you the way you do me. Now, retribution is not intended to protect society. It gets even with a criminal. It turns out it does protect society. If I kill a killer, he's not going to, or she's not going to kill again. But that's not the aim of that punishment. So you have to get this right. The aim of retribution is simply to get even. We call it simple justice, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It is not meant to protect society. So if you ask or see a question on your quiz, does retribution, is it intended to protect society? The answer is no. Does it protect society? Yes, you're getting rid of a killer, they can't kill again. So you have to know the aim. You're going to be tested on the aims of punishment. Now, prevention of the crime, people don't commit crimes if they're in jail or executed. Well, wait a minute, I thought if I executed a person up here, this wasn't meant to protect society. That's correct, but prevention is meant to protect society. That's why we incarcerate people. It protects people who follow the law. This becomes a safe zone. That's why we put the other people here, because they don't have access to this until they serve their time. So prevention prevents these people from hurting us again. If we execute them, obviously, it has the same effect as retribution. But the aim of prevention is to protect society. The aim of retribution is simply to get even. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So the aim of punishment is what's at stake at your quiz, people. Deterrence of crime discourages people